the people that would be doing that had high-powered jobs in the UK, so they were grieving the loss of that career and also the loss of familiarity in their network and their culture. So I'd be helping them through that change.
Welcome to the Immigrant Experience in America, an immigrant human library, where we amplify and humanize the experiences of immigrants in the United States and around the world. Listen in as we add another story to our immigrant human library. Welcome, friends. It's another episode of the Immigrant Experience in America, where we amplify and humanize the experiences of immigrants living in the United States and around the world. We've been increasingly meeting people who are international professionals moving across the world because of job. This is just the global space that we live in these days. You know, work usually drives where we end up living. So today we're bringing to you James Wilson, and I'll allow him to tell us about himself and give us a little bit about who's James. Welcome, James.
Hi there. Nice to meet everyone that's watching and listening. It's lovely to be here today. So I live in Virginia. I've lived here for 2 years now, since 2022. Moved with my wife and my son, who's now 7. And we moved for my wife's work. That's what brought us here. We'd lived in France previously for 10 years. We're from the UK, so we moved to France with my wife's work, and then we moved here again with her job a couple of years ago. And I'm a expat coach and therapist. And I've been working with people from around the world pretty much exclusively since 2012. So, and I've been fortunate enough to work with people from every continent on Earth, except the 2 snowy ones, obviously. All the other continents, I've been very fortunate to meet a diverse range of people from different backgrounds, different religions, ethnicities, different cultures, which has been fantastic. And prior to that, I was a therapist in the UK as well.
Okay, so you've actually transitioned to actually calling yourself a coach versus the clinical therapist. I just noticed that.
Yeah, so my original training was as a therapist in the UK, and then kind of coming to the US, kind of wanted to broaden my offering. So kind of studied coaching and kind of, which has really been great. It's really helped broaden my awareness and sort of change my approach, my work with people. So I've been able to bring in some of that learning. So I've qualified as a master certified life coach since moving here. I was qualified first as a therapist in 2009. So I've been working in the helping professions for quite a while now.
Very good. So you're certified with the ICF, International Coaching Federation?
Yeah, I'm a member of them. So I'm kind of going through that, their certification process. So I'm master certified with the organization I did the original training with. So now I'm working on becoming certified with ICF. Absolutely.
Very good. So I've only transited the UK, right? The airport, Heathrow, a number of times, going to the African continent, been to France. I think those are the times I've gone through, connected to come back to the US and so forth. So tell us, what was life like for you growing up in the UK? Is there some history behind your family being in the UK?
So they were British. A few generations before that, there was some Irish blood in there, and allegedly there was a French person somewhere in the mix. But primarily, I was born and raised in the UK by both my parents were born and raised in the same city that I was born and raised in. My parents. So that was in England. My grandfather was from Scotland, so he had travelled down to England for work, actually. And I think my grandmother's mother came from Ireland and again came over to the UK for work. So not travelling as far, but there was some movement again and that moving for work. But no, I was born and raised there. It was great. Humour is a big thing in the UK, I think. If I said, how would I describe the UK and what's about, I think humour plays a big part in our culture,
Really? Okay. Tell me
I think,
more.
it's just relationships are formed in humour. and different types of humor. And I remember reading a book by his travel writer, Bill Bryson, who's an American, lived in the UK and traveled around the UK. And he said, you can tell two British people are together because they'll start laughing within a couple of minutes of meeting. And I think that that is, yeah, a real British people like to just undercut, you know, pomposity or authority. You know, we kind of respect it, but we have to make jokes about it, you know, on any level. And I think that that undercuts our culture a lot. So there's a lot of kind of humor, a lot of dry humor, a lot of sarcasm in it. Um, so that's yeah, that's a big part of it. I think for me, the British, what it is to be British and what it is to live there. I think lot of talk about the weather. We talk about the weather an awful lot because you can get all four seasons in any one day, and that's a big part of it.
I want to ask you, what's the weather experience like? Because all I keep hearing is how much it rains in
It
London.
does
I
rain
don't
a
know
lot.
what the other parts are like.
It does rain a lot. It does rain. Yeah, no, it really does rain a lot. But you really get all four seasons in a day. You just have to, you know, there's an old saying, there's no such thing as bad weather, just the wrong clothes. And that's what it is. You just have to go outside and you just play in the rain. You just have a raincoat, you know. So it does rain a lot. It can be, summers are beautiful. A sunny day and a summer's day in the UK when it's sunny is the best because the nights go in, it's light until like 10 o'clock at night. You just, people are out. There's just a lovely mood because it's nice weather. The British countryside is amazing. There is one of my favorite things to do ever is to take a walk in the countryside and end at a pub because there's loads of pubs in the countryside in the UK, and every good walk finishes at the pub. Um, so yeah, there's all of that is very special and unique. Having lived in France and in the US, beautiful countryside, you know, beautiful geography, but again, just that slight cultural difference, I think.
Okay. I'm thinking your wife is international. You've never told me the story, but how did you meet and how did you get to move to France? Now you're in the US, like an international professional. What's her story?
Yeah, so she's from the UK, and she started working at a multinational company on the graduate scheme, and one of their British bases was in my hometown. So she moved to my hometown, and that's where we met. But the global headquarters for this company is in France, and so it's very common. That's the next step for people, even if you start in the UK, that you'll go and spend some time in France and work there. Um, so that opportunity arose to further her career. And at that time, so I'd been working as a therapist at that point for a couple of years. And one of the kind of things on my professional bucket list was to start private practice because at that point I was working in a hospital. And my logic, which did come true, but it was probably a risky logic at the time, was, well, I'll set up a private practice in a foreign country because my unique selling point will be that I speak English. Unfortunately, in the city we moved to in France, it's a very international city. And so there was actually quite a big demand for an English speaking sort of professional like myself. So I was able to set up a private practice, which was great. So yeah, so that's what, you know, where she came from. And again,
Okay.
after 10 years, that opportunity for her to move again came up, and we had a son by that point, and it was, you know, should we try a new adventure, um, you know, and try something else?
Awesome. So these were English speaking people in France who needed an
Yes,
English speaking therapist.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
And again, people come because that particular city, which is called Toulouse, has a big. This company is a big company, and it also has lots of universities. There's a lot of international students that come to Toulouse to study. So between the company and the international student population, and also there was a strand of people that would retire to France, again, often from the UK, because retiring to the French countryside. Um, and that was a strand of my clientele. People that had retired to a new country but didn't have a network, couldn't necessarily speak the language, and often the people that would be doing that had high-powered jobs in the UK, so they were grieving the loss of that career and also the loss of familiarity in their network and their culture. So I'd be helping them through that change.
Okay, so you're working with adjustment challenges as
Yes.
right, a new person in a new country.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm curious, what was it like then, practicing in France versus in the UK?
The challenges were probably more logistical at the start, just getting everything set up, tax, those sorts of things. Then it was just about marketing myself. And at that time, I was quite fortunate. There were a few English speaking therapists at that point, but none of them really either had websites or so modern websites at that point. So I was fortunate. A friend of mine had developed my website for me, so that went to like the top of Google very quickly because he knew what you needed to do to have that happen. So that was fortunate, and I would just there was a lot of taking the bus, meeting any English speaking professional, doctor, psychiatrist, gynecologist I met with, the international schools, universities. So there was a lot of, you know, pounding the pavement to go and meet all these people just to build that awareness of what I had to offer, and that started to take off, which was great.
Okay, and so the opportunity then arise for you to, though I'm curious, like how did you maneuver life in a French-speaking country as an English speaker, and then you're working with your native
Mm.
language? What was life like outside of work where you're working with English-speaking people? Did you find that you needed to build community with your wife, or was that more organic, like just naturally happen with other international people?
Yeah, it probably happened in two parts. I think one, she had a network there of people she'd known from the UK and worked with in the UK. So we were quite fortunate that there was a ready-made network. There was an international network. So that was kind of a big part of that. What we didn't want to do, we didn't want to get stuck completely in the expat, community. So we lived like in the center of the city versus on the outskirts where a lot of the expat community lived, because we wanted to expose ourselves to sort of French culture and restaurants and bars and all of those things. So that was kind of deliberate to stay there. And over time, we would just kind of build a French network that really accelerated after we'd had our son, because he had a French nanny initially, went to a sort of French school, so that was surprisingly international even for just a standard French school actually. But that's when the French network really started to take off for me, because I would be going to the park after school, meeting the parents, building those relationships, having those conversations. So at that point, that was when that really took off. But we were very cognizant that we didn't want to just live a life completely in the expat world. We did want to make sure that we were connecting with the local population and culture and stuff.
How long did you all spend there?
So 10 years. So we were there for
Wow.
10 years. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So quite a while. Um, and we had talked about moving. We almost moved to Spain. We were within a couple of hours of moving to Spain. We had agreed to move to Spain again for her work, and then they changed things at the last minute, so that didn't happen. So we would have moved to Spain, um, and we talked about going home a couple of times. Um, but it was funny when I kind of reflected on it. I really enjoyed my work and my client base. I really enjoyed that, and I didn't want to give that up. And that was probably at the time. That was pre-COVID, pre-online work. So I think that would have been a harder adjustment to make at that time. So we discussed these things, but yeah, we kind of stayed there and had our son there, and that was just a good place to be to raise him in those early years from a childcare perspective. And to get him into the French school and just have him have that exposure to the language. So he goes to a French school on a Saturday now, to try and maintain some of that language.
Okay, very good. So were you primarily working with, I think you mentioned earlier, like people who were retiring and having adjustment challenges. Were these like international professionals as well? Like who were some of these
That
people who
strand,
you're working with?
yeah. So I had various strands really. That strand was primarily British people that had worked in the UK, and then on retirement decided to move to the French countryside. It's kind of like a stereotypical British dream to retire to the French countryside or the Spanish countryside, because of the weather and things like that. So that was that strand. Then I worked a lot with international students, from all over really all over the place, all over the globe. And then there was a lot of people that worked either in this big international company my wife works for, or something surrounded that in that industry. So was a lot of that, and so that might have been sort of trailing spouses, for example, or someone working in that organisation to deal with some of the cultural difficulties they were facing at work and those challenges, dealing with that. So those were the big sort of three strands: the international students, people working in the industry, uh, and then the retiree sort of population. So those were these three big strands.
Okay, so it seemed like you developed quite the expertise in the area. You did not want to leave your that clientele, as you mentioned.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I became a sort of an accidental expert, because I hadn't really consciously thought about it before moving to France, who my client base would be. I hadn't really given it a thought. I just thought people would come to me because I spoke English, but then what it was to be an expat and obviously kind of experiencing that myself, then it was, it became something that I was very passionate about.
okay, great.
Appreciate.
What were some of your adjustment challenges as you navigated France for 10 years, being an English speaking person? Did you have any
Yes.
French at all?
No, I didn't. I no, so I had to learn it from scratch. And I'm not a natural linguist, so that was tough. And also because I was working in English every day, that made it a bit harder as well. Um, and that was probably the biggest challenge, I think. Certain there were certain frustrations, just cultural frustrations, just about um, I don't know, little things like people not necessarily being courteous if you held the door open for them, because that's just not necessarily that cultural. Or there was a lot of dog mess on the pavement, because again, that was just more accepted. People would just do that and leave that there. Um, so it was those small things, really, that were kind of irksome, I guess. Um, One also big cultural change was we lived in the centre of the city during a riot. Well, not even a riot. There was a lot of protests. The French, it's very stereotypical, but it's true. They do protest. They like to protest, um, and they set fire to things. And the police will then, in response, fire tear gas. So we were living in the centre of a city, and the tear gas was coming into our living room. You
Oh,
could smell it, and
wow.
like the riot was going on outside our apartment building, and you were watching windows being smashed and things being set on fire. Uh, that was unusual, you know. And during that period, my son was being looked after. There was a river that ran through the city, and my son's childcare was on one side of the city, and we lived on the other. And I had to walk across to get him. And walking across this bridge, there was a row of riot police that were there because they were trying to stop something happening. So I had to try and explain in my bad French that I needed to get across this bridge because I needed to go and collect my son from his childcare. So there were little things like that um, I hadn't experienced before, and that was quite a cultural difference because the French really do protest.
Yeah,
Things
I've
change
seen a
that
few. I've
much.
seen a few. I have a friend from undergrad who moved. She married someone French, and after undergrad, like moved her entire life there. I remember her saying it's so different from the US because younger folks are subsidized to stay home with their families, I think.
Mm,
Where in the US, as you're a younger person, you enter the job market as like 16, 18, everybody's off to work. I'm not sure what it's like in the UK, but it was so
yeah.
different because it to her it felt like the students were not, she was teaching English in France, I think it was.
Mm,
And she just felt like the students were not motivated like they were here in the US, just
yeah.
because of the setup of how things were. They live at home longer with their parents, and
Yes.
apparently the older population stays working. And I guess it's probably economics, and I can't really explain why they do that. But I mean, she was very
Yeah.
frustrated with the whole dynamic of that. It was so different and from the
Yeah.
US.
It's a very because it's much more of a socialist country. So there, yeah, there is much more things are subsidized a lot more. So education's subsidized. Um, yeah, so people will stay in education to 25, 26, kind of almost as standard, really. Um, and then if you get a permanent position, to be sacked is very difficult. So it's very hard that and unlikely you would ever be sacked. And then you retire earlier than in a lot of countries. So the riots, part of the riots I was talking about before, I think some of that came from there was just talk about increasing the retirement age from I think from 60 to 62, I think something like that. So the work-life balance is really important, and those things and those expectations are very much there. I think, and that is a big cultural difference to the UK and the US, really. That sort of socialist model.
Yeah, quite different when I remember her adjusting to that when she
Yeah.
moved. But I think I remember visiting, I went through Paris and took the train to Lille. It's been a number of years now, so my memory's going, but it was such a beautiful countryside during
Mm.
the summer when I went to see
It's
her.
yeah, the French
Gorgeous.
countryside is beautiful. Yeah, we were very
Yeah.
fortunate to live like half an hour from the French countryside, so really quickly you could get into it. Yeah, and it's a bit like American as much as you don't have to leave the country. Because if you want to go skiing, you can go skiing in France. If you want to go to beautiful beaches, you can do that in France. If you want to go to the countryside or a city, like in the US, you can do all of those things without leaving the country. And that's another thing about the UK that's interesting is, it's kind of diverse because if you want the sun, you need to go to another country to guarantee you can get it. If you want to go and ski, you need to go to another country. Um, like food and wine, there's a sort of growing wine industry now, a bit of white wine, but that all gets imported. So the UK is a great place to get all this different wine and food as well. The UK national dish is curry, actually. It's
Wow.
not a British dish; it's curry. So
Huh?
you get such a diverse choice of food from all these different cultures. That's really great about the UK as well. Like France, obviously amazing French food, but other cultures' food less so because it's just that population isn't the same. And I guess obviously the history as well, the UK's history with all of these different places around the world, one absolute upside has been all of these cultures, so just walking down the street I lived in pretty much, fantastic Indian food, fantastic Jamaican food, fantastic Greek food, or tapas, Indian, Italian food, so all of this different stuff, an Ethiopian restaurant was there, all of these different things. It was great.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so you transitioned to the US, and I wonder what was that like? Because the US, I can imagine, is probably culturally very different from the UK and France. What was that like for you?
On the practical level, not too bad because the language, it was like after moving to France and the things I had to set up in France and the difficulty of having to do that because of translating everything. It was almost a joy doing it in the US because, I want a mobile phone, I'll just make a phone call or I'll just go into a shop and I know that I'm going to be able to have a conversation with someone in the shop. So yeah, after the French experience, the American experience was just was easy really from the practical perspective. Um, the difference is again, one of the practical ones actually is just you have to start again. Where do I go if I want something? What shops do I need to go to get X or Y or Z? Or if I walk into a shop, where is anything? Which aisle is anything in? And it's all of that practical stuff was there. I think the US is really interesting because the language is primarily the same. Maybe there's an assumption there was an assumption on my part, oh, this will be easier. What's interesting, I think, is it's the subtle cultural differences about how people converse. And, say the use of humour, I was talking about in the UK, a really important part of the British culture is humour, less so here. So that was kind of interesting just to kind of see that. And I find it a bit more tribal here, or have found it a bit more tribal. People belong to the same church, or went to the same university, or work at the same place, or go to the same golf club. And sometimes there felt like this divide, like they didn't quite know how do I speak to this person that isn't any of those things and is a bit of an outsider. So that's been kind of interesting just to bridge those divides. So it's been more subtle, I think, but definitely there, those differences. Yeah. And obviously just those subtle differences in language as well. The words, literally the words, the subtle differences in the words that we use, and just kind of having to learn what some of those things. I thought I knew some of the like I knew sidewalk was pavement, but there was a lot I just didn't know. I didn't know, if you know what I mean, until I kind of came here. So it's been learning, not a wholesale new language like in French, but it's been learning those subtle differences.
Right. Things are spelt
Yeah,
differently versus British English versus American English.
yeah,
Pronunciation
exactly.
is different. Different words are used for different things. The same English word, but it's a different kind of I had to make that adjustment too. And then you're in the
Right,
DC metro area. That's
that's
very
right.
international, very international. Lots
Yes,
of international
yeah,
organizations of people coming in and out, lots of diplomats from different countries. So I can
yes,
imagine it's quite a mix of like having to switch back and forth with the different cultures that you have to deal with.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's right. Oh, we've made friends with a lot of people that, again, primarily through my son, going to the park after school and meeting them. And we've made, friends with people from, again, different places actually. And again, different places in the US. Because even within the US, a lot of people come to DC for work or this area. And a lot of people work in the government or in the military as well. So even the US people that we meet, they're not necessarily locals. So yeah, that's kind of diverse as well.
Right. Join us again next time for part 2 of this episode. We thank our listeners around the world, and we appreciate your continued support as we build our human library. Please remember to give us a 5-star review, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, and circle of influence.